want a copy of that recording and the presentation slides after the session. So just be on the lookout for those in your inbox. All right, now I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. We have Tara O'Hare from EPA's WaterSense program and Frank Burns from HydroCare International. So just to quickly introduce both of them, Tara currently serves as the implementation and commercial outreach lead for EPA's WaterSense program. Tara's worked on WaterSense for the past 12 years and is responsible for program operations, partner support, and outreach to commercial and institutional facilities. Tara led the development of WaterSense at Work, best management practices for commercial and institutional facilities, and has delivered trainings and webinars to a wide variety of stakeholders from all parts of the commercial buildings sector. Ms. O'Hare has a bachelor's degree in business and environmental management from George Washington University and a master's degree in environmental science and policy from Johns Hopkins University. And then our other speaker today is Frank Burns, whose current mission is to control the cost, damage, and environmental impact of water waste across CII properties. Burns is the original founder of Apana and is now the technical director for HydroCare International. So Frank has deep expertise in optimizing water use inside of buildings, irrigation systems, cooling towers, and processes common to commercial, industrial, and institutional operations. He has 6 patents, 28 years of project appointments, with the most noteworthy Fortune 500 companies. We're very excited to have Frank and Tara with us today. And with that, I will pass it over to Tara to kick off the presentation. All right, over to you, Tara.
Thank you, Carson. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you have a chance to join us today. We have a lot of information here, so I'm just going to go through the quick poll that we just did and see how you guys have been currently managing your water. It's quite helpful for us to kind of see this. And it looks like we have kind of everybody's across the board. We have a few people that have integrated it more into their business practices and that they're encouraging some of their employees and visitors to save water. So that's really great to see. We really appreciate all the work that you've been doing and hope that you can learn some stuff from us today. So I'm going to pass things over to Frank, and he's going to give the presentation. Keep those questions coming because we'll have time at the end. Frank?
Thanks, Tara. Welcome, everybody. Looks like we have a broad group of folks from all over the country, which is fantastic. Folks from public sector, folks from private sector, working in cities, consultants, as well as some property management folks. This presentation is designed to provide value and takeaways for each one of you, regardless of the size or capacity of the organizations you currently work with. We're hoping that they'll give some tricks of the trade and some proven methods, and mostly deploy a construct under which we have shown that you can gain a lot more traction with a lot of the water management expertise and technologies that have been available, how to connect them to actually gain continuous ongoing results across properties. It's going to move pretty quick, and there's a lot to cover. As Carson mentioned, you can download the recording later, so hopefully this becomes more of a resource. But getting into things, I got involved with, or after decades of being involved with water management programs across a number of notable Fortune 500 companies, I noted that there's a disconnect between the way we spoke as water management professionals and then the way technology people speak and think and act, and then versus what actually happens on the ground inside of commercial, industrial, and institutional sector properties. And that disconnect keeps these property operators, the people who actually run the properties, from gaining optimal or approaching optimal use of water, and then waste continues unabated. This disconnect is the one thing that I have observed that the successful companies, when they overcame it, they began to get the traction and migrate toward a more optimal, continuous, ongoing savings. So we'll cover, first off, the disconnect, and then how these organizations and properties think, so that we can then apply a lot of the tricks of the trade that we have inside of water management and water, the emerging technology, to be able to bridge the gap between practices that I see right now are currently quite wasteful and where we need to be as a society, which is far more optimal. Before we get into aligning the professional water management technology and tricks with the operational mindset that actually enables us to gain the traction, we need to understand the disconnect a little better. And I'm pushing down here and I'm not getting traction. Oh, sorry, mouse was in the wrong place. One of the main things that I think will help us as a profession, even if we're going and we're trying to create resource consumption impact on energy or gas, not just water, is to consider that every property, every commercial property everywhere, has somebody who's in charge of operating it. It could be a general manager. It could be the manager of a McDonald's. Somebody is in charge of that property. Call them the property operator. They typically start their day running, and it gets chaotic from there. They're the ones who get things done at the property. That's really significant because in water waste, all the problems are at the property. They're at the endpoints of the property. They're at the endpoints of the landscape irrigation. They're at the endpoints of the faucets, fixtures, and devices inside the building. So if we don't engage the property operator in a meaningful way, we're probably not going to have a lot of traction. And here's part of the disconnect that I see. Property operators are moving about their day and their property, thinking in terms of, do I have a problem? Am I wasting? And what can I do about it? And then they make the determination, is the juice worth the squeeze? Does doing something actually, should I spend my time on this? This is how they think. Well, historically, this is what they hear from water management professionals, or maybe energy professionals, or other people trying to eliminate waste. They might hear things like water budget assumptions, evapotranspiration, cycles of concentration, save a gallon per flush, Internet of Things devices, analytics, digitization, or my favorite, just have your people change their behavior. The takeaway for a busy property operator, the bottleneck to actually getting anything done at the property, is they're confused and the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So specifically water waste, I can tell you, is generally absorbed as a cost of doing business. It's literally accounted for as an uncontrollable expense in accounting. So to migrate toward where we want to be, from being confusing people to having actionable stuff, we need to get past this bottleneck so that operators understand that the juice is worth the squeeze. Sorry, hit the wrong button. In today's presentation, we're going to talk about using an operational mindset to influence the way we approach properties, the way we design our programs, our technology, and deploy it so that it thinks like an operator and therefore can be operationalized through the bottleneck of a property operator. If we're not relevant, we're going to have no lasting traction with properties, regardless of whether they're a one property or part of a fleet of thousands. And my experience over 30 years of working with clients that get things done all day, every day, because they use an operational mindset, is that if we don't provide value in the second sentence that we talk with them about, we're going to struggle. And we're probably not going to be invited back. And then we'll end up, so we'll apply the ideas that we're going to cover to a real world property, and I'll show you some tricks that you can take away and hopefully use. And then we'll talk about some case studies that of real world companies that are doing this at what I consider to be a world-class level. The first real world insight that I'd like to introduce was my team and I participated in a data hack in September in the UK, and there was this super sharp executive named Judith, director of Sainsbury Brands. I think they have 1,500 locations and they're owned by Walmart. And Judith just came straight out and said, if it's not happening on the ground, it's not happening. This is a good takeaway for all of us, because if we're considering a rebate program or we're considering some sort of method of teaching people to use less water or use the right amount of water or a technology, we should be considering how it's going to be operationalized on the ground, and things should be designed through what I call the operational mindset. Now, this is a review of operational capability steps that most major, it sort of summarizes how successful companies consider operations. At first, an idea is very new, so they're sort of weighing it and testing it. Then they get it to a repeatable step, step number 2, where they test it a little bit and then they can repeat it. What operators are trying to do is get it to repeatable. Operational step number 3. What world-class companies do is take that repeatable routine and migrate it towards something where they measure and manage off of so that they can continuously be optimized. This is how operators think, and if we can design our delivery of technology and water management practice and procedure and tricks through this mindset, we're going to get a lot more traction, or through these capability steps, and I'll be referring to these capability steps and how to climb them throughout the rest of the presentation. Like I said before, if we need to be relevant with our words, concepts, and messages, specifically to the group we're talking to. If we're talking to a group that runs a lot of properties, you've got to talk about the fleet-wide impact. If you're talking to somebody who has a factory in a city and you're going to help them, it's very specific to their property. And let's go through that. What I have done in the past is I come at the water problem and said, look, we have a water problem and it looks kind of like this. And there's this imbalance. And all we need to do is eliminate the waste, which has some financial benefits, and then we're going to be better at correcting the problem. This is sort of the existential threat argument. And the people feel good when they see this. They're like, oh yeah, we'll just eliminate the waste. But my experience is that nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens is because what I just covered isn't actionable. It has very little relevance to a specific property. And the problems are at the property. And if we don't get the person in charge of that property to understand that they can actually act on it, we're essentially an ornament. So as opposed to talking in sort of the existential threat, oh, we're wasting water type of paradigm, think in terms, I recommend we all think in terms of something that is really relevant to property operators. Operators are trained to think in terms of cost. What is it costing? And they're experts at this, and they understand their operations. So I present the concept that you're responsible for all of the things in your property, and you're frequently blindsided by damage or unexpected costs. And these can be in the form of, wasting water has normally a significant impact on sewer costs, likely some sort of an energy component, and when it involves staff time, it can be far more expensive because it takes more time to sweep a floor with a hose than it does with a broom. All of that is sort of the obvious waste category that begins to get an an operator, a property operator, oriented to, oh, okay, yeah, and you tell them that we're going to show you some tricks to gain control of this. But also there's a whole series of disconnected hidden costs that are connected. They're influenced by water waste, service provider fees, asset damage. If you have a small leak inside of an irrigation system under a parking lot, it can affect the ground underneath the asphalt, drive a heavy truck over it, and you end up with a wavy parking lot that you have to replace. That's due to water waste. If you don't use enough water in a cooling tower, you can destroy that asset. So asset damage, or what I call asset destruction, is a significant component of real costs that operators should have in their construct as they look at, is the juice worth the squeeze for engaging this whole thing? Because if we just talk about water, the conclusion is likely not. But when you begin to connect these costs, you can then point out that increasingly reputation is going to be a significant part of this. And as you look, when we get into the real world examples and some of the takeaways, you'll start seeing that the people who are doing this at a much higher level cite operational insights. So to make it relevant, I try to now get away from the existential threat thing. You can use that to get in front, to create some relevance, but the costs are much, much more attached to things that property operators deal with every day. Another, moving from, okay, these costs are interconnected and they become transparent when you begin to take control, and we're going to give you some tricks to take control. And because there's billions of gallons of water being wasted every day, it's still a little bit too much for a property operator to grasp, because how do they delegate, how do they manage, how do they incorporate it into their operations? So what we do is we break it into simple parts. Most properties break into 3 parts. They have outside, and there's going to be a whole set of tricks and delegation SOPs that will give the operator, property operator, to gain control of outside, the risks and vulnerabilities of outside. Inside, it's everything inside the building. All the faucets, fixtures, everything, filters, and there's a different set of things and tricks, and I'll cover some of them. And then some buildings have cooling, and that's a separate area. Breaking into this construct makes it more obvious and digestible for property operators to be able to proceed. When we teach companies, or when I teach companies or property operators about water management, I almost always use the toilet trick, because everybody knows what a toilet is. And if a toilet has a relatively minor 1 gallon a minute leak, that's 1,440 gallons in a day, which is about the same amount as 4 homes. From that idea, they'll begin to say, oh, wow. And then you land the idea that a toilet is a minor offender compared to the hundreds of other failure points inside of a commercial property. For outside, they're different than inside in cooling, but they're spread out at the endpoints, and they're mostly hidden, and they create vulnerabilities for a property operator that can blindside and create expenses. So to gain control of this, we first need to know a little bit about it. And the data shows that about 20% of inside building water use is avoidable, is waste, so we could control that. For outside, the EPA suggests it's about upwards of 50%. From my work looking at minute interval real-time data over and it's going on 14 years, I believe outside water use has wastage far greater. It's very significant and certainly worth gaining control of, and we'll dive more into that later. And in cooling, I was lead author on a study that enrolled over 100 units over a 3-year period, where we measured minute resolution data, water use, in real time, and we had 5 different types of technology that were enrolled in the study, all 5 types had waste events that would have been over 1 million gallons a year. And Tara has included links to this study because it's a real valuable resource, especially for policy people or people trying to gain control of water waste, because it has some solid takeaways there. One of the findings that was mapped out, and there's many in there, is that the evaporative cooling fleet is mostly operated in the wasteful to very wasteful area, a significant amount of waste, which means if you take the optimal operating target, which can be defined, much like landscape irrigation, where is that unit being operated? It's being operated in the wasteful to very wasteful range, less than 50% of efficiency, of its efficiency target. 7% of the units, from 7% of the visits that we analyzed the operator visit reports, were under conditions of active asset destruction, where they were not using enough water. That's really important. And those units were beginning to decompensate and become damaged, which is very costly for the property operator, and that should help get attention when we point things like that out. So back to this idea of staying on the message of the costs are real, they're spread out, but controllable when we begin to take control of water waste across your property, outside, inside, and cooling. And the routines to do that are relatively simple. We can, but if we don't start with the right routines, we're going to end up looking like this. And the good news is we don't have to. I think we have for a while from a professional standpoint, but there are things that we've proven work. So we're going to move to the idea of providing value right away. And again, at a property level, the trick is to give that property operator or that organization a construct of things that are very actionable. Do this now, or implement this first, and then put them on the path forward to more incremental change that incorporates things that maybe are a little bit harder to explain. Things that require an investment should be tier number 2, because that always requires a review. Let's get them on the path forward with the real simple things I'm about to go through. In my opinion, larger organizations and cities have the hardest part of the delivery of this already operationalized, which makes them a right target for integrating a Center for Water Management Excellence. We'll cover a little bit more about that here in the next steps. But if we've done a lot in water management, but something's missing. We have data from a number of different sources. We have water audits. We have training. We've done rebates, and there's success in some of these areas. And we've done begging, pleading, and a bunch of ads, but we're still not to the area of continuous ongoing optimization of water use. And what's missing, or what is delivered by applying an operational mindset, is the realization that we need to deliver actionable information in a usable format to the people at the property. And if we're not doing that, if we're doing what I did early in my career, which is write 50-page reports and detail flow rates and things like this, that busy property operator will never be able to connect to it, and it just sits and languishes. So by approaching an operational mindset, being relevant, and focusing on immediately providing value, and providing value at our touch points, small tricks, lead them, coax them into getting on the path, and they'll begin to run themselves. We can bump properties from a just wing it level up to a level where our tricks and guidance and some of the technology can be integrated into routines that they're already doing. Terra culture is habit stacking, where they already have the habit of walking around the perimeter of the inside of their building. Well, that's where most of the water waste is at. So we provide them a couple tricks to add to that existing habit. Of course, we're going into detail now. So to show me how to apply it to a property. This is a little bit more of a deep dive, and I do think it's relevant if you're doing energy or anything like this, but this has really worked for me to disarm executives at a property or executives in complex operations, because the last thing they want to hear is that you're going to try to influence their operations. So I draw a red line around a property and say, look, this is roughly your property line, and I call it the property line trick. Inside this property, you are 100% responsible, and with respect to water management, most of the problems are out of sight, out of mind, hidden. And you have vulnerabilities that will affect the parking lot surface, that will affect your cooling, that create waste and blindside you. So we're going to give you tricks to get in front of it. That short conversation right there, bam, you've just taken somebody who likely arrived at a meeting defensive, and they're like, oh my goodness, this person understands that I have all this responsibility, but I have no insight in the last thing, and I don't even know what to do in this area. So then you walk them forward and say, what you need is a construct to understand your property. Most properties have outside and inside, and some have cooling. It's helpful to think in these ways because what you're going to do is different for each of those subsections of your property. And to gain control, we're going to want to give you things that you can stack, habit stack, on top of your existing routines, so you can delegate with the expectation that it's going to be done. So, for example, on the outside, with this idea of easy delegatable things that a property operator, the head person, can say, oh yeah, let's just stack that on top of this existing routine we're doing. They have people who clean up the property. Have those people look for broken sprinkler heads. Look for landscape that's dying. Look for wet spots on the ground. They have landscapers, and they probably have managers that walk around too. One of my favorite tricks for outside is to teach a high value trick for when you're talking about outside water use, is to teach them that when they're not irrigating, have somebody look at the water meter. If you're going to do a perimeter walk, look at the water meter. If it's moving, then you're not supposed to be irrigating. You have a continuous, ongoing, constant leak. That could cost millions of dollars in repaving. So you want to go through a process of narrowing it down, finding it, and fixing it. But that's a really high value type of trick to attach to existing routines so that the property operator's like, this really isn't that different. I'll just throw that trick on, I'll stack that trick onto the other routines I have. Taking this concept and moving it to inside, one of the first things I do when I talk to an organization or a property operator about water use, specifically inside for cooling, is I ask them if they're using enough. And the reason I ask them if they're using enough, and then I go into explain, if you're not using enough for cleanup, you're going to have food safety issues, sanitation issues. If you're not using enough for cooling, you're going to destroy those assets. It resets their whole brain. They then realize that, oh, this person, then it opens them up to receive something that I think is very, very important at this time in our profession, is to emphasize that our goal is to reduce wastage, not restrict water use. So we get totally in front of that whole bizarre argument, and then we can say, let me map out your vulnerabilities and give you some tricks to get in front of them as part of your daily routine, habit stacking. For example, you have a cleanup crew that cleans toilets probably once or twice a day. Let's delegate to them. You can assign to them the task of identifying if a toilet has a leak. They're there. They're looking at it. All they need to look is for a ripple on the edge of the porcelain, and they'll find the leak, have them report it. That's a real simple habit stack. There's a laundry list of them. But it's a good way to get a property operator to see that you're relevant, you're going to provide them value, and you're going to migrate them forward on a path. One of the things for inside is this idea of have staff and service providers look for waste as you walk and work, is the sort of song here. Next to every hot water heater is likely a floor drain, and when the pressure relief valve fails, it will flow into that floor drain. If you can get your commercial property operators and their frontline staff, as they walk and work, to simply glance in the drain and see if water's flowing into it. If water is flowing into it, and it's consistently flowing into it over the day, there's likely a problem. That's a habit stack. In cooling, same trick, are you using enough water, know your vulnerabilities, and then give the property operator the SOPs for service provider and teach them how to get their management and staff that walk by the cooling systems to look for waste as they walk and work. For example, if somebody is walking the roof and sees something like this, that's a problem. And you wouldn't, it's amazing how frequently stuff is walked past. But this idea of incorporating the look for waste as you walk and work is an initial step down the right path where other water management concepts can be integrated effectively, because you have a landing spot. So with what I just covered, we can move somebody from ad hoc by diagnosing their property, breaking it into outside, inside, and cooling, giving them tricks to gain control of those things. While we're giving them the tricks, they're beginning to understand their vulnerability map at those areas, and they become more receptive to next step stuff. We wanted to talk about sub-metering and meaningful measurement, data digitization, IoT solutions, insert whatever word of the month you have there. Basically, it breaks down to putting a measurement device, a water meter likely, in the right spot so that the data you're going to get is meaningful, useful, and insightful. If you put the water meter in the wrong spot, you're going to get, you're better off not doing it. Just don't even start. And by meaningful measurement, I mean measure in a way that answers your questions, that doesn't create a laundry list of questions. It provides enough insight so that things become obvious. So we're going to walk through that because it's the next level of operational capability once we bump somebody from ad hoc to routine. This is a graph of a city water of a demonstration project we did with the city of Gilbert, where and we presented this data at Water Smart Innovation. The city of Gilbert allowed, in my previous work, us to connect a unit that measured the water use every single minute and pushed it to cloud continuously. The y-axis shows you the gallons per minute, and the x-axis is just the time of day from midnight to midnight. So what you can see in this graph is that they started watering at about 6 a.m. in the morning, and they went through a couple zones. And then about 9:30 in the morning, the system detected a continuous waste event, and it sent out an alert, and we all knew that we were looking for something. And a very sharp colleague of mine named Nikki went out and found what we were looking for a gusher. We were like, this is going to be over 30 gallons a minute. And it was turned out to be just a wet spot in the sand, and all the water was absorbing. This could have gone for months. And it was about 46,000 gallons a day. It was a broken valve. Putting a water meter at the front end of an irrigation system and reporting the data in real time allows you to detect if a zone has a break. to measure the amount of water that you're using compared to what you think you ought to use based on calculation. It gives all kinds of insights. So that's meaningful measurement inside of a landscape application. Here's a little bit more coarse view of that inside of, for the outside water use application. We had a property where the landscaper insisted they needed to use about 60,000 gallons a day of water, and the real-time minute resolution data suggested otherwise. And so it allowed us to go in and talk with that landscaper and the property operator and do incremental changes where they didn't hyperventilate, and we didn't expose the landscaper of being, just completely off base or anything, sort of kind and gentle. So we moved them, made some adjustments, fixed things, got them a significant reduction, then began to show them evapotranspiration, began to apply standard process and procedure, and we ended up getting them on a path towards significant savings. This idea of meaningful measurement is so valuable as a defense against the explain away syndrome, because in the landscape application case, we would have sat there and gone in circles with that landscaper because they were very convinced they were right. But when we had real-time data and we showed, look, you've got a leak here, you've got this and that, we were, we just basically got in front of it. So we suggest seeing the explain away syndrome, see it coming, get in front of it, and be gentle when you deal with it. But it is a near universal constant, and I think we'll get that in almost every property we work with. And meaningful measurement is one of the best things to get in front of that. Another example of meaningful measurement, putting a measuring device in the right place to illuminate what's going on and creating actionable information, is the water softener example. And the first box here is a healthy water fingerprint that looks like a bullhorn, where the first part is the backwash, and then it has a healthy brine, and then the last part's the rinse. And that's a normal, healthy water softener regeneration cycle. These other four boxes show different styles of failure that become obvious when you measure in a meaningful way. The first one, it doesn't have enough brine. The second one, it has too much brine. The third one here has no rinse. This is really bad, because if this is in a grocery store or a restaurant or a hotel or a factory where they're doing food preparation, we have clients set the regeneration of the water softener for 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the morning so that you can see it with just one meter at the front of the building, right? Well, if it's not doing its final rinse, when they come in to begin to prepare food, salt is going to go into that mix and nobody's going to know it. So it can affect food quality. And this last example is a total failure example. Here's an example in evaporative cooling. Basically, minute resolution data helps you see things. You can spot the problem when the waste event happens. You know it's there, and you can guide the resolution. So we showed how boosting this capability from just winging it to repeatable routines can be done with some of the simple tricks, and how that gets us on a path forward. And those who begin to become, incorporate water management are going to be like, okay, we need to be better at this. So measure, manage, and kind of where that's at. Who's doing this at a meaningful level? And honestly, is it really even relevant to do it as a meaningful level? Can we just make enough progress by getting people to routines like we do in recycling? Recycling, we just have routines that do it. Or is it valuable to move to advanced capability steps, and who's doing it and what are they seeing when they do that? In my professional experience, it's valuable to deploy meaningful measurement when you have more complex properties, like, for example, a grocery store hospital, hotel, schools, universities, city properties, things like simple commercial operations, small operations. You can usually gain enough control to hit it with routine, and that's until all of the technology becomes so cost effective that it opens that up. But from a who's getting this done, who's taking measurement and management, incorporating it into their reporting, and driving this culture of operational excellence till they get to world class, the best example that I am aware of is Costco Wholesale. They have deployed they're at the measurement management capability level and optimization in every one of their locations in Mexico, Puerto Rico, the United States, Canada, and Japan, and I believe they're expanding out into UK and other areas. But if you look at some of the things that they talk about, the benefits of integrated water management and operating at that higher measure, manage, optimize, it's things like, look, we're saving energy, we have operational insights. Pretty interesting. But they're the most deployed example I know of. There are others who are doing good work too. But Fetzer Winery, as far as an industrial campus, is one of the best I've seen. Great results over time. One of my favorite properties is Bellagio because it is so complex. And we took that operational mindset and just broke it into functional parts. And these are some of the results that they published with NWELL at a Better Buildings convention, and noticed that significant savings across the pools for water, but they emphasized heat. And then they started to learn things in other areas of their operation. So much so that they ended up winning an award from WaterStart. And this whole program, I have to say, was sponsored by Southern Nevada Water Authority, WaterStart, and MGM Grand. It was a combination of folks. But they won an award. Awards. They made good progress. They deployed. They operationalized. And awards are great, but how do we get this to go from properties everywhere, or from a property scaled to properties everywhere? So by focusing on the property level or an organization in all of its properties, information begins to collect, and you end up being able to provide better reporting, insights, and outcomes that executives and policy folks can use to make better decisions, and we can normalize this whole idea of being effective with water management, much like we've normalized the idea of separating trash for recycling purposes through an operational mindset. And this is the sort of mic drop. My future vision statement for all of us is that I think we can show that we can move a property from just winging it to routine really quickly. The better we do measure and manage, if we do measure and manage in a meaningful way, we'll be able to take the reporting, the guidance, and that drive that culture of operational excellence very quickly. And eventually we're going to get to this level of where we can use game technique. For example, say you have landscapers competing against each other to optimize the water use at the properties they manage. Same for cooling tower operators. And inside the cooling tower study that Tara has attached to the end of the presentation, or the link to it, there's a whole breakdown of how policy folks can drive us toward gamification inside of evaporative cooling. That construct is identical to solve the issues in outside water use landscape. A little bit trickier inside buildings, but for those two huge areas, the ideas are mapped, the how-to is mapped, and we need to start having conversations about that, because if we can get to gamification, we're basically making it, we're using reinforcement techniques that are proven to work, at least with my 14-year-old. And now we're at the Stump the Chump stage here. Tara, I guess I'll turn it back to you and let you guide some questions.
Thank you so much, Frank. This is a lot of great information, and we have a lot of great questions. So I just had a couple of slides, but I'm going to just let you guys read most of them. Just an introduction to the WaterSense program. That is the sister program to Energy Star, where we are basically trying to find simple ways for businesses and consumers to save water on products, programs, practices, and homes. So you can see the WaterSense labels here on the right-hand side of the slide, and that basically means that it has met independent certification for water efficiency and performance to make sure it works just as well. We have several product categories with almost 38,000 product models that have earned the label, so check those out. They're in tons of different places. And we have a whole bunch of resources on our website for you guys to check out. We have a whole guidebook of best practices that can help you get to adding some of those things to the routines that you may have at your property or with those that you're working with. And then we also have a webinar series. We're continuing it this year, but if you want to go back and see the presentation we did on fixing leaks from last year, that one was a little bit more focused on exactly what you could do when you're looking at a toilet or when you're looking at a faucet. It has some of those like really deeper dive kind of things in them. Or you can also attend some of the ones coming up this year. Stay tuned for the upcoming webinars. We'll be sending them out soon. So now I'm going to just go forward through some of these other slides and get to our questions because we have so many great ones. But first, here's our contact information. If you have any questions, we'll get to as many as we can now, and otherwise we'll get you an email back to you afterwards. So I'm going to get started. We have a couple here. Let's